These aren't just tales of scandal. They are chronicles of profound personal failings, shocking betrayals of trust, and the devastating consequences that ripple through society when idols fall. Why do some who have it all risk everything? And what does it reveal about the hidden fractures beneath the glittering surface of fame? Robert Downey Jr., an actor of prodigious, almost preternatural talent, practically born into Hollywood royalty, was celebrated for his charm, wit, and transformative performances from a young age. His early career was a highlight reel of critical acclaim, suggesting a limitless future. Yet this shining talent was tragically intertwined with a powerful and destructive force: addiction. His social environment, from his youth, was reportedly permissive regarding substance use, creating a vulnerability that would later define a dark chapter of his life. The late 1990s became a maelstrom of escalating drug abuse, arrests, and failed rehabilitations, a public and painful descent for a man who seemingly had everything. The specific crime that led to his most significant incarceration stemmed from a 1996 arrest where he was found in possession of cocaine, heroin, and an unloaded .3057 Magnum handgun while speeding down Sunset Boulevard. This was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of a series of drug-related offenses that demonstrated a life spiraling out of control. A raw battle with demons played out under the harsh glare of the media. The motive was not greed or malice, but the insatiable craving of addiction, a disease that had sunk its claws deep into his psyche, overriding his intellect, talent, and the desperate pleas of loved ones. His psychological portrait was one of deep internal conflict, a brilliant artist yoked to a relentless compulsion. The judicial process was protracted and agonizing. After numerous violations of probation, including missed drug tests, a judge in 1999, showing a stern resolve often perceived as absent in celebrity cases, sentenced Downey to 3 years in a California state prison. He ultimately served nearly 15 months at the California Substance Abuse Treatment Facility and State Prison in Corcoran. The reaction was one of shock and sadness. A talent so immense, so bright, was now confined, his future uncertain. The consequences were devastating at the time. His career was in ruins. He was considered unemployable, a pariah. One media report from the period described him as a symbol of wasted talent. Yet this period of incarceration, this rock bottom, became an unlikely crucible for change. What is it about the abyss that sometimes forces a confrontation with the self, paving the way for a comeback that few could have ever predicted? Michelle Rodriguez, known for her tough girl persona on screen in blockbusters like The Fast and the Furious and the series Lost, cultivated an image of a rebellious, independent spirit who played by her own rules. Her reputation was that of a fiercely authentic actress, never shying away from strong, often confrontational roles. This on-screen persona, however, often seemed to blur with her off-screen life, leading to a series of legal troubles. The context of her offenses was the sun-drenched, fast-paced celebrity culture of Los Angeles, where late-night parties and a sense of immunity can sometimes foster reckless behavior. The core issue that led to her significant jail time was a history of alcohol-related driving offenses. In 2007, she was sentenced to 6 months in Los Angeles County Jail. This sentence wasn't for a single transgression, but for violating her probation related to previous charges, including a 2005 driving under the influence and hit-and-run case in Hawaii, and a 2003 DUI in California. The crime was a pattern of disregard for the law and the safety of others, specifically related to driving under the influence, and then failing to adhere to the court-mandated terms of her release, which included completing community service and an alcohol education program. The motive appeared to stem from a defiant attitude, perhaps a belief that her celebrity status afforded her a degree of leniency, or a deeper, unresolved personal struggle manifesting as self-destructive behavior. Her psychological portrait suggested someone who chafed against authority and struggled with impulse control, a stark contrast to the often disciplined characters she portrayed. The judicial process saw judges growing increasingly frustrated with her repeated failures to comply with court orders. The 6-month sentence was intended as a clear message that the system's patience had run out. She reported to jail in December 2007, but was released after only 18 days due to overcrowding, a common issue that often sparks public outrage and debate about the efficacy of short sentences. The Los Angeles Times reported on her release, highlighting the overcrowding issue that often led to early releases for non-violent offenders. The consequences included negative press, a temporary disruption to her career, and the public spectacle of another celebrity failing to meet basic legal obligations. Did her rebellious image become a cage, making it harder to step away from a path of self-sabotage and truly confront the consequences of her actions? Danny Trejo, an actor whose distinctive, rugged face and imposing presence have made him an icon of action and cult cinema, particularly for his role as Machete, carries a backstory far more harrowing than any script. Before he was a celebrated performer, he was a young man ensnared in a brutal cycle of crime and addiction in the turbulent streets of Los Angeles in the 1960s. His early reputation was not that of a rising star, but of a hardened juvenile delinquent, escalating to a feared inmate within the California prison system. The social environment of his youth was one of poverty, violence, and limited opportunities, where gang life and drug use were pervasive. The crimes for which he served extensive time were numerous and serious, including armed robbery and drug offenses. He was in and out of juvenile facilities, eventually graduating to adult prisons like San Quentin, Folsom, and Soledad. This wasn't a one-off mistake. It was a way of life, a desperate and dangerous existence. The motive in those early years was survival, a sense of belonging within his gang, and the grip of heroin addiction, which he has openly discussed. His psychological state was that of a young man fighting to exist in a predatory world, where toughness was currency and violence a common language. The judicial process was a revolving door for much of his youth and early adulthood. He was eventually facing a potential death penalty case while involved in a prison riot, a moment he describes as a profound turning point. He ultimately served around 12 years, intermittently, in some of America's toughest prisons throughout the 1960s. During one stint in Soledad, as he himself recounted in his memoir, Trejo, My Life of Crime, Redemption, and Hollywood, a riot broke out, and he, along with others, was implicated in a serious assault. It was the fear of the gas chamber that finally shocked him into pursuing sobriety and change through a 12-step program within prison. The consequences of his early life were profound. Years lost to incarceration, the trauma of violence, and the deep scars of addiction. Yet, it was within those very walls that he began a remarkable transformation, becoming a boxing champion within the prison system and dedicating himself to recovery. How can the deepest, darkest pits of human experience sometimes forge the most resilient and inspiring paths to redemption, turning a life sentence of despair into a story of hope? Mark Wahlberg, today a highly successful actor, producer, and businessman with a carefully cultivated image as a devoted family man, has a past starkly different from his current persona. Growing up in the tough Dorchester neighborhood of Boston in the 1980s, he was the youngest of 9 children in a working-class family, his youth marred by poverty and exposure to crime. His reputation in his teenage years was not of a future Oscar nominee, but of a streetwise delinquent with a rapidly growing police record. The social environment was one where survival often meant toughness, and where brushes with the law were almost a rite of passage for some. In April 1988, at the age of 16, Wahlberg committed a series of brutal assaults. Attempting to rob a convenience store, he attacked a Vietnamese man, Thanh Lam, with a large wooden stick, knocking him unconscious while yelling racial slurs. He fled and later attacked another Vietnamese man, Hoa Trinh, punching him in the eye. The crime was not just theft, but a racially motivated attempted murder, though he was ultimately convicted of assault. A shocking act of violence and bigotry. The motive appeared to be a volatile mix of youthful rage, desperation for money, the influence of a negative peer group, and underlying racial animosity, all common in the fractured social landscape of Boston at the time. His psychological state was likely one of deep-seated anger, impulsivity, and a profound lack of empathy, fueled perhaps by a troubled home life and substance abuse. Wahlberg was arrested, charged as an adult, and pleaded guilty to assault. He was sentenced to 2 years in Suffolk County Deer Island House of Correction. He ultimately served only 45 days of his sentence, but has stated the experience, and particularly the realization he was incarcerated in the same facility his father had been in, was a critical wake-up call. The Boston Globe reported on his crimes at the time, and later, on his attempts to seek a pardon in 2014, which drew considerable controversy and opposition, particularly from his victims' advocates. The consequences of his actions were immediate incarceration and a criminal record that haunted him for years. Though he turned his life around dramatically, achieving global fame and success, these early, violent acts remain a dark shadow. Can a past defined by such brutal, racially charged violence ever be truly outrun, even by decades of subsequent success and apparent reform? Paris Hilton, the hotel heiress and original reality TV superstar of the early 2000s, built an entire brand around an image of glamorous, carefree, and often ditzy privilege. Her reputation was that of a célébutante, famous for being famous, living a life of perpetual parties, designer clothes, and carefully managed media exposure. Her social environment was the glittering, often vacuous world of Hollywood nightlife and global jet-setting, where consequences sometimes seemed like an afterthought. In 2007, this perception of untouchability met a firm legal barrier. The crime that led to her incarceration was not, in itself, the most egregious, but it represented a pattern of disregard for legal sanctions. She was sentenced to 45 days in jail for repeatedly violating the terms of her probation, which stemmed from a 2006 alcohol-related reckless driving conviction. She had been caught driving with a suspended license, an act that demonstrated a clear defiance of court orders. The motive appeared to be a potent combination of youthful arrogance, a sense of entitlement often associated with extreme wealth and fame, and perhaps a genuine underestimation of the seriousness with which the courts would view her continued infractions. Her psychological portrait was that of someone so insulated by privilege that the ordinary rules seemed not to apply, a bubble existence that was about to be sharply pierced. The judicial process was highly publicized, with many watching to see if her celebrity and wealth would allow her to evade real consequences. When she was initially sentenced, then briefly released to home confinement after just 3 days due to a medical condition, only to be ordered back to jail by a furious judge, the drama intensified. She ultimately served 23 days at the Century Regional Detention Facility in Linwood, California. Media outlets like TMZ and Perez Hilton, ironically, feasted on the daily updates of her incarceration. "This is a wake-up call for her," one legal analyst commented at the time. The consequences were a period of intense public scrutiny and ridicule, but also, reportedly, a moment of reflection for Hilton herself. She later stated the experience was traumatic, but formative. When the gilded cage of celebrity privilege finally gives way to the steel bars of a jail cell, even for a short time, can it force a genuine confrontation with reality and personal responsibility? Christian Slater, with his distinctive voice, edgy charm, and often rebellious on-screen personas, rose to fame in the late 1980s and early 90s as a captivating young star. He was seen as a successor to Jack Nicholson, possessing a similar dangerous allure and roguish appeal. His reputation was that of a talented, if somewhat volatile actor, one who lived life on the edge. This image, however, frequently spilled over into his real life, leading to a string of arrests and public struggles with substance abuse and anger management. The context was the often hedonistic Hollywood party scene, where access to drugs and alcohol was rampant, and where a bad boy image could, for a time, even enhance one's mystique. In the summer of 1997, this pattern culminated in a particularly alarming incident. After a night of heavy partying in Los Angeles, Slater assaulted his then-girlfriend, Michelle Jonas, and a male friend who tried to intervene. When police arrived, he fought with them, reportedly biting one officer and attempting to escape. The crime was a shocking outburst of violence. Assault with a deadly weapon, his fists and feet, battery on a police officer, and resisting arrest, all fueled by a cocktail of cocaine and alcohol. The motive was not premeditated criminality, but a loss of control driven by severe substance intoxication and underlying anger issues. His psychological state appeared to be one of a man battling significant addiction and an inability to manage his emotions, creating a destructive pattern that repeatedly jeopardized his career and freedom. The judicial process saw a judge less than impressed with his celebrity status. Slater pleaded no contest to battery and was sentenced to 3 months in jail, followed by 3 months in a residential rehab facility and a year of probation. He began his jail sentence in December 1997. Reports from outlets like E! News at the time detailed the chaotic nature of the arrest and Slater's apparent state of extreme intoxication. The consequences were another damaging blow to his public image, further disruptions to his career, and the stark reality that his personal demons were leading him toward a path of self-destruction. When does a rebel persona cease to be an act and become a genuine threat, not just to a career, but to the safety of oneself and others? Mike Tyson, Iron Mike, was more than a boxer. He was a cultural phenomenon in the late 1980s and early 90s. His ferocious power, intimidating presence, and tales of a troubled youth transformed by the discipline of boxing captivated the world. He was the undisputed heavyweight champion, a symbol of raw, untamed strength. Yet this aura of invincibility shattered dramatically. The context was the pinnacle of his fame and fortune, a world of immense pressure, sycophants, and unchecked ego. In July 1991, Tyson was accused of raping Desiree Washington, an 18-year-old Miss Black America contestant, in an Indianapolis hotel room. The crime alleged was a brutal violation of trust and person, a stark contradiction to any romanticized notion of the powerful athlete. The ensuing investigation and trial became a media circus, polarizing public opinion. Tyson maintained the encounter was consensual. The motive, from the prosecution's perspective, was the predatory exercise of power and control, an entitlement born from a life where desires were often instantly gratified. Psychologically, Tyson's portrait was complex, a man who had overcome immense adversity but also struggled with impulse control, aggression, and a troubled understanding of relationships, all amplified by an entourage that rarely challenged him. The trial in early 1992 was one of the most publicized of its time, featuring emotional testimony from Washington and a steadfast denial from Tyson. The jury ultimately found him guilty of 1 count of rape and 2 counts of criminal deviant conduct. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison. The reaction was seismic. One of the world's most famous athletes was now a convicted felon. He served 3 years at the Indiana Youth Center, later renamed the Plainfield Correctional Facility, released in March 1995. The Indianapolis Star extensively covered the trial, quoting prosecutor J. Gregory Garrison, who argued that Tyson felt he could take whatever he wanted. The consequences were profound. A career interrupted at its peak, a reputation irrevocably damaged, and a societal reckoning with issues of celebrity, consent, and sexual violence. For the victim, Desiree Washington, the consequences were immeasurable and lifelong. Does the adulation poured upon sports heroes sometimes curdle into a dangerous sense of entitlement, blinding them to the fundamental humanity of others? Wesley Snipes, the charismatic action hero, known for his intense on-screen presence and physical prowess, was a global icon in the 1990s and early 2000s. His reputation was that of a disciplined martial artist and a shrewd businessman, a figure who seemed to command respect both in Hollywood and beyond. He moved in circles of power, his roles in films like Blade cementing him as a bankable star. Yet beneath this veneer of control and success, a different narrative was unfolding, one involving a staggering defiance of civic duty. The context was a period of immense earnings and complex financial dealings, a world where financial advisors promised ways to legally, or so he might have believed, shield vast sums from the government. The crime, however, was stark. From 1999 to 2001, Snipes failed to file federal income tax returns, ultimately owing millions. This wasn't a simple oversight. It was a sustained period of non-compliance, a deliberate choice, the prosecution argued, fueled by anti-tax protester ideologies and a belief that he was somehow exempt from the obligations that bind ordinary citizens. The motive appeared to be a complex tapestry of greed, misguided advice, and perhaps an actor's overdeveloped sense of invincibility, a belief that the rules simply didn't apply to him. His psychological profile, as painted by the proceedings, suggested a man deeply distrustful of the system, yet one who had profoundly benefited from it. The trial was a media spectacle, laying bare the intricate financial maneuvers and the actor's justifications. In 2008, he was acquitted of the more serious felony tax fraud and conspiracy charges, but convicted of 3 misdemeanor counts of failing to file tax returns. The sentence, 3 years in prison, a stunning blow. He began his sentence in December 2010. Public reaction was mixed. Some saw it as an example of celebrity entitlement meeting its match. Others felt the sentence was harsh for misdemeanor charges. The consequences were severe: a tarnished legacy, a stalled career, and the very public humiliation of a star being reduced to a federal inmate number. As reported by the Orlando Sentinel during his sentencing, prosecutors stated Snipes had earned more than $38 million since 1999 and had filed no tax returns. His incarceration served as a stark warning. But does the pursuit of wealth and fame inevitably lead some to believe they can exist above the law, a world away from the responsibilities of common citizenship? Tim Allen, beloved by millions as the affable, tool-loving patriarch Tim the Tool Man Taylor on Home Improvement and the voice of Buzz Lightyear in the Toy Story franchise, embodies the quintessential American comedian. His reputation is that of a family-friendly entertainer, a purveyor of wholesome laughs. However, long before he became a household name, Allen navigated a much darker, more perilous path. In October 1978, years before his comedic ascent, Allen was arrested at the Kalamazoo Battle Creek International Airport in Michigan. The crime was possession with intent to distribute over 650 grams, nearly 1.5 pounds, of cocaine. This wasn't a minor indiscretion. It was a serious felony drug trafficking charge that carried the potential for a life sentence. The context was a pre-fame existence where Allen, then in his mid-20s, was reportedly trying to make money, and perhaps was also caught in the allure of the drug scene of the era. His character at the time was far removed from the bumbling, well-meaning figures he would later portray. He was involved in a dangerous, high-stakes criminal enterprise. The motive appears to have been primarily financial, a misguided attempt to secure a significant payday through illicit means. Psychologically, it may have reflected a period of youthful recklessness, poor judgment, and an underestimation of the severe consequences. Facing the dire prospect of life imprisonment, Allen chose to plead guilty and, crucially, provided the names of other dealers to authorities. This cooperation significantly reduced his potential sentence. He was sentenced to up to 8 years in federal prison, but was paroled after serving 2 years and 4 months, released from the Federal Correctional Institution in Sandstone, Minnesota, in 1981. As reported by sources like People magazine years later, Allen himself has referred to this period with regret, stating, "It was a watershed moment. It put me in a position of great humility, and I was able to make amends to friends and family and refocus my life on setting and achieving goals." The consequences of this early crime, had he not cooperated or been caught later in his fame, could have entirely erased the career millions came to know. How does a brush with such a potentially life-altering sentence reshape a person's ambition and their understanding of second chances? Bill Cosby, for decades, was more than just a comedian or actor. He was America's dad, a beloved icon of wholesome family values, moral uprightness, and groundbreaking success for an African-American entertainer. His reputation was impeccable, built on decades of family-friendly sitcoms like The Cosby Show, stand-up comedy that celebrated domestic life, and a public persona that exuded warmth, wisdom, and trustworthiness. He was a philanthropist, an advocate for education, and a seemingly unimpeachable moral authority. This carefully constructed edifice, however, concealed a horrifying secret, a decades-long pattern of predatory behavior. The context was one of immense power and influence within the entertainment industry, a position that allegedly allowed him to manipulate and silence numerous women. The specific crime for which he was eventually convicted was the aggravated indecent assault of Andrea Constant, a former Temple University employee, in his suburban Philadelphia home in 2004. Constant testified that Cosby drugged and sexually assaulted her. This was just one accusation among dozens, stretching back decades, painting a chilling picture of a serial predator. The motive, as pieced together from the accusations and trial, appeared to be a grotesque abuse of power, a systematic exploitation of his status and the trust placed in him to gratify his sexual desires. His psychological profile, as suggested by the sheer scale and nature of the allegations, pointed towards a deeply manipulative individual, capable of compartmentalizing his public benevolence from his private depravity, a cold-blooded calculation hidden beneath a veneer of charm. The first trial in 2017 ended in a mistrial. However, a second trial in 2018, in the full glare of the Fanch Me Too movement, resulted in a guilty verdict. He was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in state prison. The public reaction was one of profound shock, disgust, and a painful reevaluation of a cultural icon. As the Associated Press reported, at his sentencing, Judge Stephen O'Neill declared, "No one is above the law." The consequences were catastrophic for his legacy, erasing decades of goodwill and branding him a sexual predator. His numerous accolades were rescinded, his reruns pulled. Then, in a stunning reversal, in June 2021, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned his conviction, citing a due process violation related to a previous prosecutor's agreement not to charge him. He was released from prison, a decision that caused further anguish and outrage for many. How can a figure so publicly associated with morality engage in such a profound betrayal of trust? And what does such a fall tell us about the seductive, corrupting nature of unchecked power? Or are these simply human failings, magnified and made public by the relentless lens of fame? The impact of these crimes extends far beyond prison sentences and financial penalties. It erodes public confidence, not only in individuals, but sometimes in the systems meant to uphold justice. It begs the question, how do we as a society foster a culture where accountability is valued above status, and where trust, especially in those who hold significant influence, is not so easily weaponized or discarded. And more broadly, when the actions of a few, whether celebrities or those in positions of authority, damage our collective faith, how can we begin to rebuild trust in the institutions designed to protect and serve? What steps do you believe are necessary to increase public confidence in our justice system and law enforcement, ensuring that fairness and integrity prevail, regardless of who stands accused? Narrator. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the shadows of fame. If these stories have sparked a thought, a question, or a reflection, please share it in the comments below. We value your perspective. Don't forget to like this video if you found it compelling, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the complexities of true crime. Until next time, stay vigilant and question everything.